Thank you, and good morning. The only thing more exciting than kicking off your morning with a policy and regulatory conversation is following up with a second policy and regulatory conversation, so thank you for bearing with me. I would venture to guess, if I asked for a show of hands, of how many people in this room have ever met their congressmen or their senators, it would probably be a pretty limited few. I'm also willing to bet that if I ask that same question about how many people in this room know the names of their congressmen or their senators, it would also be a limited few. But that's okay, because most people don't. Most people don't understand how to engage. But from my perspective, it's critical that we learn the tools to be able to make an impact, not only on crypto, but on all issues that the government faces. So let's get into it. What are we going to cover today? Fundamentals, life of Congress, how to engage, and then current landscape. Think of my first two buckets here as a flashback to your 8th grade civics course. Or for my international folks in the room, think American History 101, Government 101. The third bucket, how to engage, we're going to talk about the tools, the best ways to actually influence and make an impact on these lawmakers. And then the fourth bucket is a what the hell is going on in DC. I'll give you my current, most up-to-date state of play. So we got to start with the fundamentals. We can't have a conversation about the United States government and how to engage lawmakers without talking about the three branches of government. The US government is based on the fundamental principle of checks and balances. When the founders of the country were framing the Constitution, they were so worried about becoming the British Empire a monarchy that they bestowed individual powers to three separate branches of government for the checks and balances. You've got the legislative branch that has the ability to write laws. You've got the executive branch, which enforces the laws, and the judicial branch, which interprets the laws. So think Congress, the White House and executive agencies, and then the court system, including the Supreme Court. In order for a bill to become a law in this country, a representative or a senator has to introduce a bill. It must then get referred to a committee, pass that committee of jurisdiction, and then come before each body for a full vote, pass both the House and the Senate, same bill, and then go to the president's desk for a signature. So just in of itself, it's a pretty complicated process. Take the politics out of it, it's a complicated process. Now, I know I just told you, and we just watched a 3-minute video, by the way, good luck getting that out of your head, that song, that the only way to create a law in the United States was through the Congress. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Think of the way that congressmen and senators create laws through the Congress as frameworks. So take, for instance, the Safe Drinking Water. In 1974, the United States Congress got together and they said, hey, look, we think that the United States and the American people should have basic right to drinking water. Pretty good idea, right? Now, when they put together the framework, they put together some baseline principles of how that should look. But in the bill, they directed the Environmental Protection Agency to actually write the underlying rules and the specifics of that. So think Congress put together, all right, everyone should have this basic right. It should cover all 50 states. EPA go in and you tell us exactly how much chlorine should be in the water. But with that rulemaking authority, they've also given them the ability to update the rules as they go. So the same contaminants that existed in 1974, most of them probably still exist today, but by virtue of technology and chemistry, there are new things that come on the market, so they issue new rulemakings to update the safe drinking water limits, right? So that's rulemaking. The next one is an executive order. This is, from a basic perspective, a power bestowed upon the presidency that allows them to direct individual agencies to take a specific action. Now, the most famous executive order of all time was the controversial EO that came from President Trump, in which, on national security basis, he banned about 8 or 9 countries, the citizens of 8 or 9 countries, from entering the United States. Now, obviously very controversial. Ultimately, the courts overturned that, and it no longer became the law of the land. The third piece and the third bucket of this is case law. Now, Michelle just covered a lot of case law, so just to be clear, I'm not a lawyer, so I defer her on all of these legal opinions. But for the purpose of this conversation, think, when Congress is building out these frameworks, a lot of times some of these laws are pretty vague, and they're open to interpretation. So people will bring suit on some sort of case, it will be tried in the courts, and then ultimately the interpretation by that judge or series of system of judges based on sort of the Supreme Court will ultimately become the law of the land. three very famous Supreme Court cases that obviously have made a huge impact on American life. Roe v. Wade for a long time was sort of the representative law that governed abortion in the United States. It was recently overturned by the Dobbs decision. Brown versus Board of Education, think segregation, ended segregation in the United States. And then the SEC versus W.J. Howey Company, the Howey test, which governs the basic principles of securities laws in the United States. And of course, because we can create laws in many different ways, there are also many different types of policymakers. You've got members of Congress, the President of the White House team, agency and cabinet heads that obviously have rulemaking authority, and then state and local officials. Eric Adams, the NYC mayor, is up here, but also think governors and council members and things like that. Now, I want to spend the next little bit talking about the life of Congress, because I think it's important for us to understand what drives these people, what motivates them, if we're going to be able to effectively engage in a particular way. So first up, what drives them? Three buckets: constituents, stakeholders, and elections. Think of constituents as everyday voters. In the House, there are 435 members of the House. Each of them represents about 750,000 people. In the Senate, there are 2 senators per state. Each of those senators represents all of the people, all of the members and residents of that state. So obviously, if the people that elected you in and that need to continue to elect you in are your constituents, you obviously need to be beholden to them and regularly interact with them. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is stakeholders. Everyone in this room is actually a stakeholder. You are all startup founders. You all have very interesting stories. People are going to want to hear from you, including members of Congress. Patrick McHenry, who will be here later, he will want to hear from you. That's part of the reason that he's here. When I interact with the government, most of the time, unless I'm complaining in my local government about like a pothole or something like that, generally speaking, I'm engaging as a stakeholder. I'm a representative from Andreessen Horowitz. I'm advocating on my registered lobbyist. I'm advocating on behalf of AI, crypto issues, and then just general venture capital issues. But that doesn't mean that you have to be a company to be a stakeholder. There are plenty of other informal coalitions and nonprofits that advocate from everything from crypto to ocean conservation. And then the third bucket, which is probably the most important, is elections. Ultimately, this is what drives people. They want to remain in elected office, and they have to campaign regularly. In the House, they elect new members every 2 years, so you must run for re-election every 2 years. In the Senate, it's every 6 years. So as you can imagine, this is a pretty tight turnaround for a lot of folks. They're constantly fundraising and campaigning, which also dictates, based on the information that they get back from constituents and stakeholders, and then their ability to win election, that dictates sort of their individual policy positions and the things that they say publicly. So who are the players? So bear with me here for a bit. The chart that I've put together here is pretty crude. This is not, a perfect representation of how things actually operate in the Congress, but for the purpose of this conversation, I wanted to give everyone a little bit of a visual. I chose the House, but a similar setup sort of maps over to the Senate as well. At the very tippity top, you have the Speaker of the House. Think of the Speaker of the House as sort of like the CEO of the House of Representatives. Anything within the House rules, which is agreed upon by all members of the House, anything within that space, pretty much the Speaker has full authority and autonomy to do what they want. Nothing gets done in the House of Representatives unless the Speaker signs off on it. Directly below that, you have the Majority Leader. The Majority Leader's principal function is to schedule the House of Representatives. No votes occur without the Majority Leader's sign-off. And then they also determine which bills come in front of the House of Representatives for a vote, which obviously, if you can't get a bill even up for a vote unless the Majority Leader signs off, you can imagine that's a very powerful position to have. The third one down is the whip. This is an interesting position. The whip's principal function is to encourage and ensure that members of a given party vote in the direction of a policy priority that is put before the House. So if the Majority Leader schedules a bill, the whip's job is to ensure that all of the members from that party vote the direction of that bill, right? Whether it's yes or no. Below that is the conference and caucus chair. Think of those as sort of the education arm and the communication arm for an individual party. The next bucket is committee chairs. We're going to hear from a committee chair later. This is not a perfect example because a lot of times committee chairs actually have somewhat equal authority to the whip or the leader or the speaker in some circumstances. But these are individuals that are elected by their peers to be subject matter experts. We have everything from energy to financial services. Again, we'll hear from the financial services chair later on. But no bills can actually make it to the House floor unless the committee chair of jurisdiction signs off on it first, then it must move forward. And then at the very bottom of this is the rank and file members. These individuals, think of these folks as sort of like the constituency to the top tiers, right? The top buckets, committee chairs, speaker, leader, whip, conference chairs, are beholden to these individuals. These individuals sit on their committees, they offer policy ideas, and ultimately they can't move anything through unless these individuals actually vote the way that these people want to. So they need to be very responsive to these rank and file members. And then before we move on, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this as a former staffer, the importance of staff. Staff are incredibly critical. These are the subject matter experts that work in these individual offices. All of these buckets of people have individual people that work for them that are very influential and also very smart on specific topics. But staffer worked hard and they're stretched thin. For instance, in a given office, you reach out to your local congressman or something like that, and they introduce you to their tech policy staffer. That individual not only is probably responsible for all the political and policy fault lines of the broader tech community, they're also responsible for all tax issues. Maybe they handle gun issues. Maybe they have to handle abortion. There's a million different things that they also have to cover. They divide and conquer, based on sort of a staff of 4 or 5. So what do they even do? I like to think about this in 2 different distinct buckets: in session, out of session. And what do I mean by that? In session is the period of time where the majority leader has scheduled these people to be in town and actively voting, right? So they're in DC, they're doing a whole bunch of official activity. What does that mean? The 2 or 3 primary things that they're doing when they're in town is they're holding official committee hearings, which is an opportunity for them to hear from subject matter experts on a given policy topic so that it helps shape the individual policies and bills that they're putting forth. And then the second piece is markups. Markups is an interesting term, but exactly how it sounds is what it is. This is an opportunity for all members of a specific committee to get together and consider specific bills, debate them, and then offer amendments, and then eventually pass them through so that they can move on to the House floor. When they're out of session, most of the time they're spending back home in their districts or in their states. They're meeting with the constituents. They're doing local ribbon cuttings, which is sort of more of the ceremonial stuff. And then occasionally they're doing town halls and international diplomatic travel, which is called congressional delegations, or CODELs for short. This is a good opportunity for them to go and meet with troops internationally and also international local leaders and things like that. So possibly the most important slide of this entire thing is the marriage between policy and politics. I think a lot of times when I'm engaging with portfolio companies, they're like, look, the policy is obvious. Why can't we just get this done? And ultimately, the answer is politics are complicated. I think this is probably, think of policy as the idea and politics as the negotiation. It can seem so obvious sometimes what the policy position should be. And in reality, the politics are always sort of behind the scenes and at play, which is the negotiation. All right, so this is my framework for the 5 stages of legislating. Think of this as kind of like the 5 stages of grief. Crypto is actually a really wonderful example for this. So when crypto first started, think early 2010s, right? There was a lot of disinterest from DC. People were like, oh, cool, look, like these guys are creating like funny internet money. Like, I don't really care. It's not going to become this big thing, right? And then eventually it started to take hold. Celebrities started getting involved. There was a lot more interest. People were like, okay, wow, this could actually make a huge difference in the world. Let's get behind it. I want to be sort of the cool member of Congress that wants to get out there and support new tech and stuff like that. Eventually, it hits critical mass and it gets so big, and sometimes, certainly, there are some nefarious actors, and we all know that there are some of those people in Congress, but ultimately, you hit a period of time where there are people in DC that believe these things are a threat, right? And once they go into that mode, not only does it be sort of like a political platform that they can run on, it also becomes, a mission of theirs to try and kill something. Once you move out of the threat stage, people realize, okay, well, look, this thing isn't going anywhere, so we need to have some sort of negotiation about how to actually build a framework around it, right? Which means there are people here that just want to run a policy of just completely killing it off, and there are other people here that, hey, like, this is the greatest thing, this is going to completely change the world. Those 2 differing policy positions is a very difficult thing to come over, but that's the struggle phase. And then eventually, once you get through the struggle phase, you're able to create law. My personal opinion is that I think crypto is sort of exiting the threat stage and moving into the struggle stage. The problem is the struggle stage can take a while. So why is legislating so hard? I think Thomas Jefferson summarized it perfectly. I'm certainly not an advocate of frequent and untried changes in laws and constitutions. I think modern imperfections had better be borne with. Ultimately, the reason is the system was created to be difficult. The whole purpose of trying to ensure that we have a system of checks and balances and that we didn't end up with one-party rule to try and steamroll over and completely change the country is because they designed it to be a difficult process to actually fundamentally change laws. So what's going on? Let's talk about a little bit of a current landscape here. What's the current state of play? The good news is there is a lot of overlap with what's going on in both the House and Senate. And there are two primary functions from a legislative perspective that people were trying to address. There is what we have broadly called sort of in the crypto policy community as a market structure bill, and then there's a stablecoin bill. And there are a number of different proposals out there that are trying to attack this from different angles. And what do I mean by market structure bill? Right at the heart of the issue. How do we define a security and commodity from the existing securities and commodities laws? What needs to be updated? And then how can we allow centralized exchanges to register with these individual agencies and then come into sort of a modern regulatory regime? That's the two basic principles from a market structure bill. From a stablecoin perspective, it is how do we offer a pathway for stablecoin issuers, fiat-backed stablecoin issuers, to register with a federal agency and then also be under the regulatory perimeter and be able to operate sufficiently. Now, within each of those is a very complicated web of state and federal law, obviously a lot of history and case law precedent that has come into play. So it's been difficult. The good news is, particularly in the House, and you will hear from one of the key sponsors of not only stablecoin legislation, but a future proposal on market structure later this afternoon, there is a ton of movement for two major chairmen that I think also have the support of their individual leadership. The other positive piece here is there's bipartisanship. In the Senate, the Lummis-Gillibrand Responsible Financial Innovation Act was a landmark piece of legislation that came out last Congress. It is being modernized and then will be dropped again this year at some point soon, but it seeks to tackle all of the issues that I sort of just laid out. And then what the heck is going on with the administration? Unfortunately, not much. In the past, a little over a year ago, the president issued an executive order, which we walked through earlier. This executive order, unfortunately, didn't have much teeth to it. It was really a direction to federal agencies to come out with a bunch of reports. The reports, some of which were sort of benign, and others were quite inflammatory, making recommendations that are completely untenable for the broader crypto ecosystem. So what's being done? What are we doing on a regular basis from a lobbying and engagement perspective? The first piece here is we're trying to bridge the gap between committees, and I think we've been fairly successful, particularly in the House. And what do I mean by bridging the gap between committees? Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Ultimately, committees have very specific set jurisdictions. In this case, you've got the Financial Services Committee, who has historically represented and had jurisdiction over things like the Securities Exchange Commission and all specific financial products. On the flip side, the House Agriculture Committee and the Senate Agriculture Committee has full oversight over the CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission. And there is a question about whether or not tokens are securities or commodities and where that line gets drawn, right? So if you have two separate committees that are trying to interact with one another, obviously they're going to have some sort of coordination. And individual ones are going to want to try and eat up the space to be sort of like the hero and the person that actually owns digital assets, because it's kind of a cool, new, sexy topic. So we've been working very hard to make sure that they are interacting well with each other and working together to try and put forth something that's positive. We believe that's going to come in the next couple months or so. The second piece is we're making changes to existing proposals. We're trying to update and modernize existing proposals that were first good steps, but didn't have a chance based on the politics and some of the underlying policy to actually get over the finish line and become law. So we're working on that. And then the third piece is we're trying to establish a negotiating field. Remember earlier I talked about how we're now exiting the threat stage and into the struggle stage. And in that, there are people over here that want to kill it. I think everyone probably knows some of those people's names. And there's people over here that think we shouldn't regulate it at all. That's obviously not a good system for trying to negotiate because you have two people that are on two far ends of the spectrum. I will make an American football reference, but think of it this way, right? We need to establish the playing field, which is 100 yards. End zone on either side. Crypto right now, it's like a 300-yard game. We've got people all the way over here and all the way over here. We need to get two moderate proposals in both the House and the Senate to set up those two end zones so that we end up at the 50-yard line, which is something that's reasonable that everyone can take on. So what does all this mean for you, right? Here are the three most common myths that I hear from people when I engage with them and say, hey, look, I really want to get involved in DC. I just don't know how. Here's what I'm thinking. First is only lobbyists can engage with lawmakers, or I need to hire a lobbyist. Just flat out untrue. For those of you in the room that are American citizens, all of you guys have a congressman, you have a senator. These people are designed to be able to hear from you on a regular basis. That is how the system of government is designed. The second is my voice won't be heard. These people are too important. They're running around all over the place. A couple things on this. One, they have staff. And those people, not only do they work back home in the states and districts, but they also work in DC and they represent the member of Congress on a regular basis. And two, they spend an incredible amount of time trying to respond to each individual person who reaches out to the office, both by phone call, email, Twitter, Facebook, all these different social media channels. So your voice can be heard. And the other thing I'll say here is, you guys aren't just regular constituents. You are very interesting startup founders that people want to talk to. They want to hear your expertise. Trying to boil these things down and bring them up to speed is very, very important. And the third is I have to be of the same political party. From a first principles perspective, regardless of political party, these people are there to represent you, no matter your political affiliation. And also, here's the real reality. There isn't some sort of public database that, issues how you voted over the last couple cycles. So you'll be fine. They won't know that you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or wherever you choose. So how to engage and when? The first bucket is join, build a Web3 coalition. We're all in Web3. What the heck is a coalition? What does that actually really mean? Coalition can be everything from a very, very formal organization with a head or a CEO that runs these types of things that you can be a member of, like a trade association, all the way down to a group of 5 of you that want to meet in the CSS boardroom and say, hey, look, we really care about all the same things, and we're going to call ourselves like the cool kids club, and we're going to advocate for Web3 positions. It can be as simple as that, but I do think helping organize people in a specific way, coming together and making your thoughts as simple as possible, and then illustrating them to lawmakers is a critical component of all this, and I would be very encouraging of it. The second piece is, once you've sort of built out this coalition, or you've decided that you want to be a part of a coalition, the second piece of this is reach out to staff. Every single one of you has the ability to go online, type in your address, and it'll tell you exactly who your congressmen or your senators are. Once you find that, you scroll to the bottom of their website, you look at the bottom of it, and it gives you all of the different phone numbers and email addresses that you can contact these people on a regular basis. I would encourage you to pick up the phone, ask to talk to their tech policy staffer, introduce yourself, and say, hey, I'm XYZ, I'm the founder of XYZ and Company, and build that relationship. Talk to them very simply about what it is that you do and how important blockchain technology is to you. That will start to make an impact. I can guarantee you that there's probably 4, 5, 6 organizations right here in LA that would be more than willing to have a conversation with you, and that can be a bridge into some of these offices. And then the third piece is, this all doesn't have to happen on the federal level. I think the federal level is very important, but part of this is we're not getting a groundswell in DC of local leaders, council members, mayors, things like that are going and talking to these federal officials on a regular basis. Go to a local organization, go to a local talk, go to an open mic at council members' office. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the YouTube clips of Chad and Brad or something like that, where they go to LA City Council and they ask for like a yacht program. It exists. I mean, it's funny, but that stuff exists. You can show up and you can go to a mic and say, hey, blockchain technology is really important to me, and leave it at that. And that in and of itself has made a huge impact. So what are the key takeaways here? First, don't wait to engage, start now. It's as simple as picking up the phone and just trying to make a phone call and quickly advocating on behalf of something that you believe in. The second piece is take the time to learn how DC works. We have a big policy team that are happy to be resources for you. But it can be as easy as curating your Twitter and making sure that you're sort of following some people that are of interest. There are free public newsletters that come out every morning that do an excellent job of breaking down the fault lines in DC, Punchbowl, Politico. Everyone in DC reads these things. They are very educational and they help explain dynamics very well. The third is remember that legislating was designed to be a very hard process. We're going to get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time. And the fourth is, keep your chin up. I think that you're going to hear a much more positive tone from the member of Congress that we have coming in here later, who will be able to answer some additional questions. But the key is keep building. The more use cases that we have, the more positive things that we can show these lawmakers, the better off we will all be and the better talking points we all have. So don't worry, this is easy. Happy to take any questions.
How's it going? Lewis from the SHIELD team. Thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could provide a little bit more of like high level behind the scenes of like what forces are at play in DC. Like obviously, you have Coinbase on one side.
Yeah.
But it's not just like private versus like public, right? There must be like the banks, like are the banks picking sides? Like,
yeah.
I kind of want to know those details. Like, okay, like, the politics of it, like what is the real issue?
Yeah, so what's the landscape, right?
Yeah, like
so
who's on what team?
So let's talk about lawmakers first, and then I'll get to other stakeholders in the space, because I think the banks is a really good point to bring up. At some point within the last 3 years, and I don't think it was a specific moment, although FTX has sort of catalyzed this feeling, I think that there were some outside groups. I think some of these trade associations and there's like consumer groups that are out there that are sort of advocating behind the consumer. But ultimately, while they're doing a lot of good work, there are also sort of business organizations that need to make a lot of money. I think that there was a shift in some of the fraud cases they saw, and they started to sort of fundraise off of the back of crypto, bringing crypto into justice, bringing it into a regulatory perimeter. So I think that there was a big shift from lawmakers at some point within the last 3 years, and now they very much believe crypto is a bad thing. I don't think that's the vast majority, but they're also very, very loud. So you have the consumer advocates over here that think that this is bad for consumers. Big group of them. That's the first bucket that are particularly putting a lot of impact on Democratic members. From a stakeholder perspective, I think traditional financial institutions, and I think the banks fall into this category, are absolutely, they don't know what to make of it. But there are definitely some bank groups that are working against crypto behind the scenes, absolutely. And I think once we eventually get to a situation where they believe a bill actually might be able to move, which I think we're getting to within the next several months, you will hear many more financial institutions, traditional financial institutions and banks, come out vocally and probably oppose some of that legislation and or say, look, we're regulated this way. Any crypto company out there should also be regulated this way. That's sort of the talking point that they've been using, which of course, right, like the technology is different. We all know that in this room.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent talk, and I love the visuals that you showed, by the way.
Thanks. Thank you. I hope they were helpful.
Absolutely. One of the questions I have is related to the coalitions.
Yeah.
Can you give a few examples of the best coalitions that you've seen? Like the size of them, what type of activities they would do, the cadence of how they meet, and to actually have a very strong impact. Can you just talk about some of these coalitions?
Yeah, so I think the most traditional, two different buckets, right? And truly, they almost serve two completely different functions. There are major, huge trade associations in DC. A16Z is actually a member of a couple of them, one of which advocates on behalf of crypto. But think everything from the banks to labor unions to big pharma, they all have these major trade associations that have a lot of money involved in them, right? They have hundreds of members. Think every big pharmaceutical company is a member of this. They hire a huge team of people. It's a formal organization. They hold all kinds of events. They go in there, advocate all the time. They're very effective. And part of the reason that they're effective is because they're very concise in their messaging, and they are also defending against bad things happening to them rather than trying to proactively get something done. So I do think there is a space for these big entities because I think that they help fill a void in an echo chamber in DC and push the message in the right direction that they want it to go. Now, on the flip side, and I think what I was more wanting to allude to, so actually thanks for asking this question, is from a grassroots perspective, people back, not in DC, not going out to DC a lot, you're back in sort of the district or the states. I've seen incredibly effective groups of like 15 or 20 people that are passionate about it, that are just out there taking the time to educate their members, like being persistent, hitting up staff, taking the time to really boil things down very simply for them. Because look, like, you can't tell me, and there are very, very few people out there that once you actually kind of explain to them the fault lines of blockchain tech and or crypto, and how many different aspects of technology and the web it disrupts, that they won't come along, So I think there's a great group of people in the Boston area that have been fantastic advocates to some of the Massachusetts members. There's a representative, Jake Auchincloss, who's a big crypto supporter, that has gone in and talked to some of these kids from MIT and Harvard that have made a big impact on them because it's genuine. They're not talking to someone like me who has spent my career learning to talk to lawmakers. They're like, okay, great. I don't want to hear from another guy like Collin. I want to hear from an actual practitioner. That is really impactful, and that can sway an individual member. Once you get one member, it's like kind of a network effect, It just continues to boil around us, particularly if that's a senior member of the committee, right?
Thank you.
Just building on that question, are these initiatives category specific? And I'm asking because we're building particularly around a consumer application in the beauty industry. And I worry that the regulatory framework for tokenization gets hijacked by these extreme DeFi scenarios. And almost like there's a lot of people in the room that build for gaming. And from how this system works effectively, are those coalitions or like even the regulatory framework, is it perceived as a category specific application, or is it just like one blockchain rules?
It's an awesome question. I will say, even Brian and I sitting in the back, right? We've been trying to help a group of people that are a little bit more formidable in the NFT space kind of have a separate NFT conversation that doesn't get sort of dragged into the broader, cryptocurrency. I think first and foremost, yes, there absolutely is space to sort of be issue specific about these coalitions and try and draw a line between, all right, look, I'm not trying to disrupt some sort of financial services product. I'm actually trying to disrupt social media or something like that. The problem is we're kind of all in Noah's Ark together right now, because ultimately we're fighting for tokenization, which means that we have to have some sort of clarity that allows us to sort of exit the securities laws, or at least give us some sort of framework by which the next Ethereum can be built, because that's sort of the catalyst of it all. So one of the ways that we've been approaching it is let's bring in some use case examples that don't have to deal with just sort of traditional disruption from financial services. Let's bring in some people that are like building on top of blockchain that is, some basic things, right? So it's great and it's good. It's super, super helpful. Feel free to form non-traditional financial services use cases and push that message, because I think it's very helpful. But just know we all have to sort of collectively solve this core issue so that we can unlock the rest of it.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Collin. It's fantastic.
Thank you, guys.